Brutal week here in the Troxel household. Everybody's been sick, super
Oh,
sick.
jeez.
Not
Yeah.
COVID, nothing, thank God, but influenza A. Let's call it what it is. That's what it is. And I haven't been sick since I did get COVID at the AIA conference in Chicago. And that was like 2.5 years ago, and that sucked. I
That
remember like that
that damn
sickness
conference.
sucked,
Yes.
and here we are. Like this was just as bad. It felt like it felt just as bad. Like night sweats, fever,
Yeah.
coughing like crazy, just major, unending headaches. And then my wife caught it a couple days after me, and
So
so
you're just passing it around.
yeah, I gave it to her, that's for sure, and then she's just dying upstairs. So we have
So
never
did you,
like just sat around and done nothing so much as this last week because we could not do anything.
so do you guys have amplo influenza
Yes,
where you're coughing your head off?
yes. Too much coughing, too much nose blowing. Oh yeah, stay away. Yeah, it's just hold up the stay away. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it's been like around here last week. So it's been brutal. How are you?
Deadlines. Deadlines.
Look at
And
you
then
wearing you're wearing some crazy uniform here. What is going on?
sportsing. I am sportsing.
Are you fanaticking over there? You're a sports
It
fan.
is, yeah. It's playoff season, and for once in a very blue moon, other than last year, my hometown team, can't we get to celebrate the fact that they're in the playoffs. They're number one seed. They won their division. They've had the best season that they've ever had in the history of the franchise. And what is interesting about it? So, yes, I'm sporting right now with my Lions gear and all of this other stuff.
I
But
have so many questions for the architects in the room. I
yeah,
just I want to give everybody a chance here for you to tell them what does playoff season mean, like for those of us who don't give a crap about sports.
here, I'm about to hang up on you real quick.
Don't make me cough.
And we've lost Evan. He's dead now.
All
Um,
right. I think we can figure it out. I think we can figure out
I'm pretty sure you can figure out it's the road to the Super Bowl. However,
which is like some fancy event that's coming up, I assume.
here's some fancy football event that
I
is
could play a
is
little dumb. It's
happening
kind of
soon.
fun.
I know, exactly. I know you watch football. I know that you're.
I
I know
haven't
that you're.
watched this season. I haven't watched this
Well,
season. I did last
probably
season.
not because I know that your father-in-law is a big
49ers
diehard
fan.
49er fan.
Yeah,
Well,
not
he didn't have
happy
much
this year.
to watch. Exactly.
Right.
But see, okay, understand that is basically what my life as a Detroit Lions fan has felt like the entire existence.
Disappointment.
And so when people say, you took that news pretty well. That was some pretty bad news, and I don't think that I would have reacted that way. I'm like, well, then you're not a Lions fan. I have
You're not
been
a true
built.
fan.
Well, no, it's just anything, any type of like, hey, we're gonna have to let you go. Oh, okay. Just, well, I mean, it's not like it wasn't expected, kind of thing. It's like always expect the worst, and if you get something better than that, all right, thanks.
Nice.
You you have to understand that the feeling that I have right now about this weird feeling of euphoria that I have for the Lions right now this season is something that is so unfamiliar to me that I don't really know how to react. Like even when I'm watching, and I'm sorry for everybody who's listening, it's like, oh no, not another Lions fan. On a great season and stuff, blah blah blah. Look, we've earned this. Like it has been a while. It is.
You get your
It is
shot
never
in the limelight here.
It is never. I've been to one playoff game for the Lions, and this was back in the 90s, and it happened to be against Tampa Bay, and so I happened to be at well, for those of you who know that I have the dual allegiance between my place of birth, Detroit, and Tampa Bay. because that's where I was raised. And so I have this dual allegiance of teams and stuff. And so, you know, anyway, so whatever. But
Very good.
here, let me try to like pull this into maybe not architecture per se, but kind of like this. There is this feeling in the city that, again, it's one of these things that nobody's ever felt before. Nobody's ever felt the kind of optimism. And it does sort of reflect what is going on in Detroit right now. You know, this kind of like rebirth of the Lions coming from basically just abject failure all the time. You know, it's just like, how do you think the Lions are going to do? Well, you know, they're going to suck. We're going to start off with hope, but then it's going to go away. Like game 2, 3, 4, it's going to gone. And, you know, it was just the pact that we've made with ourselves, right? But the effect that it's had on the city, and not just the city of Detroit itself, but the greater metro area and stuff like that, it's really amazing to see the team itself somewhat embodied like this, you know, gritty nature of like, we're just going to pick ourselves up and we're going to do our best, and we're going to keep doing it till it like becomes something better. And then like the city of Detroit, you drive around and you look at like, I remember when we first started coming back here way decades before we even decided to move here, and you would drive through, and you didn't drive through Detroit at night. You drove through during the daytime at best, and you would see like vacant buildings, vacant shops and things like that, things boarded up, things dilapidated. I'm sure if you've probably seen any design magazine, you'll see that the Michigan Central Station was completely restored, renovated, restored, historic preservation. It was, you know, this fantastic, you know, basically rebirth of a building that you looked at and you would say, yeah, there's no way in the world that this building should survive, because it's just been abandoned for so long. And if you go, everybody who was like captivated by ruin porn, most of the time that ruin porn was in Detroit somewhere.
Right.
And Michigan Central Station was, you know, front and center in a lot of those. And now there's been such a huge investment in the city that old buildings that you thought, man, there's no way that they can bring them back. I'm driving past, you know, I drop my son off at Wayne State University every so often, and to drive down Woodward Avenue, which is kind of like the main thoroughfare bringing you into the city, there's these buildings that you look, and they've got construction fencing around them. And the conventional thought is, oh yeah, they're going to just demo that. No, they're restoring that. You look at that building, you're like, there's no way that building can survive. Yeah, that building will come back. And that's actually, and so the Lions themselves are sort of like, they've embodied that kind of like, you know, rebirth.
Phoenix rising from the
exactly,
ashes,
which is why we are getting behind them so much, and like, you know,
everybody
loving
loves
them.
the comeback story. Yeah,
everybody loves the comeback story, and sure, people are probably, oh, we're just getting so tired of like the Lions fans, just they're annoying and stuff. I hear that all the time, and I'm like, you know,
it's almost over. Season's almost over.
We look at it this way, and it's not, to be quite honest with you, for us, it's really not just about football. It really is the story of the city. And I find it amazing. I mean, if you think about it, like where I was born in Pontiac, that's where the old stadium was. And they demoed that and they moved it into Detroit. They moved the Tiger Stadium into Detroit. They moved like all of these different sports teams were in Metro Detroit area, but not necessarily in Detroit. I mean, the Tigers were in Detroit, and although the stadium, and I know that this is going to be sacrilegious to say, sort of looked like a barn, you know, but now everything's kind of come to the center of the city, and it's in downtown, and so they're building an entertainment district around it, and you know that is spawning other developments to happen, and now there's an investment of, you know, a couple $2 billion worth of innovation centers, University of Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State University, the three R1 institutions in the state of Michigan all are investing in downtown Detroit to have downtown campuses and downtown innovation districts and stuff like that. And it is kind of amazing to see. And so you see all of these like people who talk about this kind of like otherworldly thing that the Lions are. It's all about kind of like this, there's going to be some groans on this one, but they say restore the roar. We're restoring the roar, not just of the Lions, but of the city. And so
do you think that
really
that only could happen because it got so bad? Like, is it because it went to total ruin that it could be rebuilt with innovation centers and all of this investment? You know, because like,
well,
if it doesn't get to that point, like the stuff is not bad enough to replace, and you just keep using it, right? And it's really interesting to see like that transformation happen, but that transformation seems like it only could have happened if it got so bad that it had to be rebuilt, replaced, restored, whatever.
Yeah. If you know the city, then you know that there was a lot of dilapidated buildings that they were just caving in on themselves. Mm-hmm. And ultimately the city started to demolish them. And so then you'd have vacant lot after vacant lot after vacant lot. And so, you know, just those vacant lots started to create other opportunities. And those opportunities are starting, it's like, so basically they've got, I don't really want to call it a blank slate per se, but it's kind of there is somewhat of a blank slate in some of these where you've got such a patchwork of what was there has given way to what can be there.
Yeah.
And now everybody's embraced okay, what's next? You know? And so I totally agree with you that I definitely think that, as you said, if it didn't get so bad, we couldn't be where we are now. That's also somewhat a badge of shame as much as it is kind of this, ooh, look at us, we're, you know, coming up from the ashes kind of thing.
No one wants to have to go through that.
Right. Exactly.
But it happened. Right.
However, it could also be this template for other cities who've somewhat suffered that as well, so that they can say, okay, what is Detroit doing right that, you know, we could learn from? Right? I mean, they're even looking at things like the Renaissance Center, which was a John Portman building in downtown, where they're looking to kind of like redevelop that a little bit, potentially even remove some of the towers that are there. This is all speculation. I mean, it just came out as I can't remember which architecture firm did this proposal, and it seemed to gain some traction, and some people were like, no, don't touch the Renaissance Center. And I look at the Renaissance Center all the time, and again, a little bit more sacrilegious here, but as a dog, I mean, architecturally, it's like, I love the actual main tower. Like it feels like Silo, the movie or the TV show. You know, it sort of feels like that when you go inside there.
I think a lot of John Portman does, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Every time I see that show, I'm like, they're totally got some strong John Portman energy here.
I heard rumor that the set of, and I could be talking out of, you know, my backside here, but I heard rumor that they had used the Renaissance Center main tower as inspiration for the silo. Which, I mean, if it's true or not, I'm going to live by it for a little while. You know, Why not?
You heard it here first.
I heard, yeah, exactly. And even if you guys find that it's absolutely bunk and false, don't send anything to me. I want to live. I'm a Lions fan. I'm a Lions fan. I want to live in a fantasy land. But, you know, they're talking about removing a couple of the towers and redeveloping that whole area and creating a real waterfront. I mean, the one thing that I find really, now, if you look at all of the historic photographs of Detroit built all the way to the edge of the river. So there's the Detroit River, there's Windsor, Ontario's right across the way, you know, basically closer than you can imagine of how close Windsor is to us. And so it was so developed literally all the way to the water's edge that there was no real like downtown parks and things like that. So now they've been developing it where they're creating some, you know, downtown parks. They're starting to try to like redevelop some of the areas that were these vacant lots that are becoming more green. And they're just trying to make this more of kind of a modern like riverfront city that you would think of when you think of it. I mean, Baltimore's going through the same thing where they're starting to kind of like rethink and redevelop their waterfront. And so Detroit's doing the same thing. And I got to applaud them because like growing up in the city of St. Petersburg, we had this beautiful, like the city of St. Petersburg reminds me a lot of what I've seen. And I'm going to say what I've seen pictures wise of like, say the waterfront of San Diego, where it's just, yeah.
Say the same thing.
Where there's just a lot of like urban parks and things like that, but there's a lot of green along the water's edge. And you just sort of wish that some of these other cities, like these Rust Belt cities, would do something similar to that when they're doing their development. Instead of like building all the way to the water's edge, let's make it an amenity rather than something that just says, oh, we got to build right up to it. Like,
industrial.
Do you?
Right.
Yeah. Do you? But I mean, it was interesting is like looking at some historic photographs. In fact, I actually just bought one because it had a picture of the Boblo Island. I think they're like riverboats kind of thing. But basically, Boblo Island was a amusement park. And basically, if anybody who grew up in kind of like the 70s, possibly even 80s, I'm not sure when it closed down, but I know that when we left in 75, that was the very first amusement park I ever went to because that's just what you do when you're here. We didn't have like Six Flags or Disney or things like that. But you saw that photograph that I bought showed development literally right to the water's edge.
Yeah.
And there was like no room for anything. It was just a complete just urbanization to the edge. And then of course, made it nasty.
Yeah, right.
And now people are kayaking.
There was no space for people there.
Yeah.
Right. It was right to the water.
Exactly. And now people are kayaking in the river, which is, if you think about it, pretty unheard of when almost all of that like industry was like dumping into the river and everything else. So, again, I gotta give them signs of progress.
This episode is made possible with support from TimberTech. The conversation around outdoor spaces is being redefined. TimberTech, everything wood should be, is at the forefront of a technical renaissance in synthetic decking, transforming how architects approach design. TimberTech's advanced materials merge innovative engineering with striking aesthetics. Proprietary polymer capping and precision color blending mimic the natural beauty of hardwood, authentic wood grain patterns, rich tonal depth, and elegant matte finishes. But unlike wood, TimberTech is built to endure, resisting moisture, fading, and even resist wildfires, with warranties that set a new industry standard. Sustainability drives this renaissance. TimberTech boards are composed of up to 85% recycled materials. For every 15 by 15 TimberTech deck, up to 40 full trash bags of recycled PVC are kept out of landfills. A closed-loop manufacturing process ensures these materials support both your designs and the environment. Flexible design options empower your vision. From multi-width boards to heat-bending capabilities, TimberTech pushes the boundaries of what outdoor spaces can achieve, seamlessly blending with the indoor aesthetic. Explore the advancements behind this shift. Visit timbertech.com/architects with an S to access samples and reimagine your next project. TimberTech, everything wood should be. Go check out timbertech.com/architects and check out everything they have to offer, and let them know that you heard about them on the Archispeak podcast. Our thanks to TimberTech for supporting this episode. Now let's get back to the conversation. Well, I want to make an announcement here about our new little website that we threw together.
Oh, yes.
And the reason I did this was because we actually have been getting some questions. We've been answering a few here on the show, but just recently, some new ones have been coming in on our feedback page on our website. But we made it even easier, and so I want to throw it up on the screen here now. There's a QR code that you can use your camera on to go to askarchispeak.com. We bought a domain so that we could handle just questions for the show. And that's a great place to ask. So if you have questions, it's better to go there than it is to go to social media. And again, that is askarchispeak.com, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening, just head over to askarchispeak.com and ask your question anytime you want, 24 hours a day. They go into the queue. Cormac,
just real quick, though, just for everybody to kind of like round out that thing is, you can ask the questions 24/7, and Evan is patiently waiting and will be there, standing by. He'll be
operators are standing by.
Exactly. Gets a ping. Here's that. Ooh, a question.
Right. Actually, a light goes off in the bedroom if it's in the middle of the night. If it's during the day, a siren actually goes off. Yeah, and exactly. I'm on it. It's like the bat phone. It's like the bat signal.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Cormac, and this did not come in via the QR code or via askarchispeak.com. This came from my own question-generating mind. What's your problem with Corbusier? Just so the listeners know, Cormac has big problems with Corbusier, and I thought this would be a fun topic to jump into. This is going to be a glorious rant, I believe.
You're going to put me on the spot here.
I am putting you on the spot.
So, to preface all of this, Evan knows that I have, as much as I listen or do, as we saw in the last show, CEUs, I like audiobooks as well. A lot of times it was because I was commuting all the time, and so I've got a pretty good library. Well, I've been building that library with a lot of architectural audiobooks, and I've bought one on Mies, bought one on Corb, and write all sorts of ones. So, I mean, in what's interesting about this, and so this is going to expand this conversation will expand beyond just Corb, because those three that I just named all have very similar traits when it comes to like their finished work. And that finished work is, if we can call it finished work, and I'm going to do like the little air quotes here, finished work, leave something left to be desired. Not in aesthetics, not in the avant-garde way that they change the design language of architecture. I'm not disputing any of that. I'm just disputing the fact that, maybe, just maybe, when you're designing, say, like Villa La Roche or Villa Savoy is this great one where I'm sitting here and listening to this, and they're talking about it, and they're talking about that it came down to litigation between Corp and the Savoy family, where they didn't really occupy the building because it was moldy, it was drafty, it was leaking, there was moisture in the thing. And they claimed that it was because of the architectural details. He claimed, it was just bad construction. Fast forward to things like, Mies, similar things with the Farnsworth house. I went through the tour when I was in bed, and you've heard very similar stories about like basically all of these things. Now, here are people. Now, let me back myself out of a corner for a second.
I want you to back up even farther and just say, like, what is the name of this book that you're reading? And if you could just give a kind of an idea of what the narrative, the position is. Is it like touting Corb as God's gift to architecture? Is it a historical account of certain projects? Like, just if you could give some ideas about what the material is. The main
so
source.
the title is Modern Man by Anthony Flint, and essentially it's basically just more or less a biography of Corb, and it goes through. And it talks about certain projects. It talks about relationships with clients. It talks about his kind of like perception of himself, where when he arrived in America, he was very disappointed that there wasn't like paparazzi waiting at the, gangplank when he, came over on the boat. And the publicist that they brought him over had to pay a photographer. You're going to love this. Had to pay a photographer that he saw taking like pictures of someone else. he walked over them and said, "Hey, can you take pictures of this guy?" And the photographer was just like, "I just ran out of film. I can't help you." He's like, "Just pretend. Just stroke his ego and pretend that you're here to take photographs of him."
Wow.
And so Corp kept looking in the papers to look for this article with this. He was doing these nice little historic architecture poses, hand on hip, chest out kind of thing. And he was just like, "Well, when is my article coming out? I'd love to see these photographs." And the guy just kept kind of stringing him along until basically like there was no more conversation about it. But that's a different story altogether. But what was interesting in this, I seem to find as a constant kind of like thread between a lot of these different early avant-garde architects. Current just happens to be the current one, is because they believed that architecture school and architectural education wasn't for them because it was rooted in classical architecture and things like that. And they were a visionary. They were an artist. This was the same thing with Wright, that they didn't have to go through that. And the one thing that suffered from that wasn't the adventurous spirit of design and this avant-garde nature of like turning the like what we would conventionally see up on its head and creating a completely new language of architecture. But what their lack of education created was this lack of understanding of how buildings go together, how to actually keep the water out, how to actually keep walls from molding, how to actually keep it habitable. One of the things that we were actually like what we today get paid for to do is health, safety, and welfare of it. And health is one of those. And when you're creating buildings, and almost every one of his buildings have suffered this same problem, it's this level of arrogance that, don't worry, who cares if it rains, but look at the architecture. And can you say, is it really architecture if it just looks pretty, but doesn't actually do its job of like providing shelter? And that's the same thing that I have with Wright, is that here I am standing with a friend of mine, and we're in Taliesin, and we're talking, we're in this group, and they're talking about all of these like, these cutting edge like design trends and all of this other stuff. And it's pouring down rain outside. And I'm just looking over at a window, and it's pouring inside. And I'm just like looking at them like, "Hey, anybody gonna like deal with that?" There's like, a whole lot of water coming down and just pouring all over this wood sill. And I just see it's like, yes, get some caulk, like plug all those holes, do something, please. Like, I loved the build. I love all of this architecture, but I have this issue with, let's just call it disdain for this arrogance of like, well, I don't need to worry about, like construction methods and things like that. It just has to look pretty. Like that's not the function of architecture, is just to look pretty. I mean,
think that the issue,
I want
though,
all architecture to look pretty, but I also want it to work.
Well, yeah, it has to work. I mean, architecture is not art. It actually does have to function, right?
It's a functional art, right?
Well, art doesn't have to function at all. I mean, that's the
But architecture.
But architecture does, right? I know. That's what I mean. Like that's what I'm saying. Architecture actually is not art, right? It isn't because it has to work. And art doesn't have to. I mean, art has a very special meaning behind it, right? And that is that it doesn't have to do anything. Right. That's what makes it art. But I think it is interesting that, because my response as you're sending me these you're translating your disdain into your phone device that is then sending messages to me as you're listening to this. And on one hand, and on the other hand, like, we wouldn't be where we are without those things. And I mean, that was my response to you too, right? It's like, well, would architecture even be where it is without these so-called masters, right? Because of pushing form and function beyond what was possible, right? Obviously, because
Right.
I mean, it was and to failure, right? And there are still architects today that practice like this, and
Yes.
it's a spectrum, right? You get everything
Right.
from pushing the limits, beyond the limits, breaking the limits, what's
Yeah.
possible, down to like the totally mundane, boring stuff that shouldn't be considered architecture, right? And there's everything in between in the built environment. And I just wonder if we as a society of practicing architects in the built environment would be where we are today without those rule breakers, because that's really what it is, right? Like
No.
they're breaking the rules. Like they
Right.
broke the rules with what was conceived of as an education and architecture, all the way finding people to pay for these really
Right.
advanced, we're going to call them sculptures, right?
Absolutely.
That still stand today, and money continues to be poured into these
Yeah.
things to keep them standing, even
Those are
though they're a
I
failure on many levels.
will say that that's one thing to me that really kind of just like chaps my hide.
The amount of money that it takes to keep these going,
the amount,
and yet they're still broken,
Yes.
fundamentally.
the amount of money. And I loved the experience of the place of the Farnsworth house. Don't get me wrong. But I just like tens of millions of dollars over the course of its life have been poured into the Farnsworth house to basically keep it alive, to constantly keep rebuilding it, to constantly keep doing it. And in a way, great, because we need to hold on to these masterworks. But then there's also what could we have done with all of that money to possibly further advance architecture in a different way, or something else, so it's interesting because the amount of money that it took to repair falling water so that it wasn't falling in the water, the amount of money that it's going to take to repair Taliesin, Wisconsin Taliesin, and I'm sure Taliesin West, which is still on my bucket list to go to, are just these things that it's like, okay, they're great. So here was the thing that I was thinking about, and this is just a complete side note, so I apologize. But as I'm this drive that I did looking at all sorts of different architecture, I was thinking to myself, how could you do these exact buildings like the Farnsworth House, like Taliesin, in modern day construction, meeting modern day codes? And the question first was, can you? And if you could, or if you could make an attempt to it, how would it change what it was? Because like the Farnsworth House could not be built the way it is now. Not the way, and people are, and I guarantee you I'm going to hear somebody say, oh yeah, you can do this, you can do that. Look at the details. Look how thin they are. Look how delicate they are. Look how, like, there's a simple, thin transition between, like, say, the window and the floor, the window and the columns and things. It's so minute because of a very intentional design decision. Can you still do that in today's codes where you need either like continuous installation or thermal breaks or things like that? That there's absolutely nothing about that holds up to today's codes. And,
But they didn't have to back then, right? But
they
yeah,
didn't have
but
to
like
back then.
So yeah, you've already answered your question. The answer is no.
Oh, I know.
And it depends maybe where, but in those locations, no.
Yeah.
I mean, to your point about building codes, there actually are places that don't care about building codes today, right? And so potentially you could build those things in those locations in a similar manner, where it's like you're not consulting a structural engineer. You're just doing it, and you're going to see what happens. I mean, that's basically what they did back then, right? It's like, let's build it.
Right.
I mean, seems like it'll work. Let's see what happens. Exactly. Not thinking about it 100 years later and what it was going to take to maintain it throughout that time.
So that's exactly like the point of my pro for all of these is they were adventurous. They wanted to push the envelope. They wanted to, take things. It's like, okay, here's your standard detail. How can I turn it on its head? How can I make it something different, something special, something unique? How can I further think outside of the box? In that, to me, so now I get to like back myself up and say, okay, you've made the project manager complaint about does it
Right.
work? No, and all that other stuff. Well, now it's the architect side of things. It's just like, I want them. I need them. I want them to exist because I want to see and feel and have other people see and feel and experience this, all of these different periods of time where architecture was pushed to its limits and then beyond, in coming up with creative ways of talking about how we address shelter and all of these other things. And I want them to continue to keep pushing them. And so examples like these are those examples. Examples like, say Gary's Guggenheim or big ski slope energy plant and things like that. All of these are things that we need to continue to keep pushing architecture. And you're going to have those people who say, we don't need to push architecture. It was good the way it was, and we can stay that, we need to stay that way. And there's going to be people who want that. But there's going to be people who want that avant-garde, that change in it. And so then you look at it, it's just like, well, look at what they used to do here and how adventurous they were in pushing the envelope and all of that other stuff. And they're like, well, it didn't really work. Like, well, we still keep that spirit of pushing, but then try it our way. Now because we still have a book of constraints that we have to conform to, but how creative can we get? And you see like all of these people, all of these Gary and Big and Caltrava and Renzo, all of them push the envelope of what it is, but they still have to conform if they want to build. They still have to conform to codes. They still have to conform to everything that they do. They just do it in the most creative way. And those are the things and so as much as I kind of dump on them sometimes about like what they do, we also need them to do what they've done so that we can continue to do what we do, which is try to innovate, right? So now you can't come back at me and like say, Cormac's going to just like take crap all over Corb.
I think the crap that you were, though, like the sentiment was because you hear like the cheerleading for, and you just kind of get tired of it, right? Like you hear the God's gift to architecture, to the built environment, to the world, and you're just like, come on, it doesn't even keep the water out, right? And that's you
exactly.
But at the same time, like you do recognize that the percentage of these buildings is so small on the grand scale of things. It's like 0.0001% of all the built environment that is doing a lot of work, inspiring, pushing the envelope, the different words that you're using, right? It's like they are doing a lot of work for a very small number of projects.
When we went on tours for all of these different like Masterworks, Mises works, Frank's works, and all of these other stuff, Wright's works, whatever you want to call them. Everybody's just like, Mr. Wright. I'm like, it's Frank to me.
You're Frank to me.
We were homies. But it's the thing that I found so amazing is that when they were like, do we have any architects in the group? And you'd have like one or two people hold their hands up. But then you'd have like a group of 50 and maybe you'd have like 2 or 3 that are architects. And then the other ones were non-architects, and they would be coming from all over the place to see these.
Yeah.
Who travels to the middle of nowhere?
That's what I'm talking
Illinois,
about. Like these projects are doing an amazing amount of work.
Whether
you like them or not, right? As an individual,
right?
Like they actually are doing quite an incredible job.
Yeah.
Still.
Oh yeah.
And how long have they been around? Right. So it is interesting to kind of think of it in that way.
Yeah.
How impactful they are.
Right.
To your chagrin, right? And some level.
I just so okay, now back to the bagging on him. part of things is the
Balance.
whole book.
We must
the
have balance.
The whole book is cheerleading for Corb. And what is amazing about Corb is he was a master at selling himself. The interesting thing about it is that he was not very technically inclined. He didn't do the actual like construction documents and things like that for his buildings. He come up with like the concept, the idea, this thought of like, minimalism and all of these other things where, things that he came up with, but like he had his cousin was his structural engineer that ultimately made the things work the way they were and stuff like that. It's just like we hear Corb, but Corb's work would not exist without his partnership.
Yeah.
And it was just so interesting.
It's hard to
just
do it
like,
all, Cormac. It's hard to do it all as a single sole practitioner. You know this.
Oh, yeah.
What you're saying is, though, like all the name recognition is there in the branding, and it's not it's not a single person's pen that did all the work.
It's Corb. But we would not have those buildings. We would have the idea of those buildings for Corb, but we wouldn't have those buildings without, Pierre Jeanneret? Why am I blanking on his cousin's name? But anyway, we wouldn't have them without him. And so it would be
it's
like
forgettable. The other person's name is totally.
Sadly, it is become forgettable. Sadly, that is the reason why. Is because like we're saying Corb all the time, but we're not saying the guy who actually made all of his stuff work. It's just kind of a shame. It's just a lot of times. Sometimes in my career, I felt like I've referred to myself a few times as king builder, never a king. Whereas like I'll do all the work and somebody else gets all the glory kind of thing. And we've all felt that on occasion, just like, hey, we won this big award and all of this other stuff. And they're just like, hey, Evan, pat yourself on the back. You did such a great job. And everybody else behind Evan is just like, wait, what do you mean pat Evan on the back? Well, there's a whole lot of patting that needs to go on. And, it's just, or if you think about it, when we do like groundbreakings or like ribbon cuttings and stuff like that, and everybody, the back patters that I think you and I have talked about before, that were on client side and all of this other stuff, but the actual building itself, the design of the building and all of that was the architects sitting off on the side, just
never mentioned.
Clapping. It's like, yeah, well done, kind of thing. And we were never
They call
mentioned,
it, the ceremony of the uninvolved. Yeah,
that's right. That I remember. That's what you said that numerous times, and I just forgot. But
yep.
But yeah, so I mean, it is a good read, a good listen. It is interesting because I find myself more and more wanting to go back, and I don't know if you recall, like Towards a New Architecture. Wasn't that Corb's book, or was that Rasmussen's book? Anyway, but I mean, like all of these different books that we were assigned in college that we read, and I'm going to use air quotes here, that we read.
Yes, I definitely read those. Yeah.
I'm going back and I'm like, I want to reread this. Kevin Lynch's Image of the City, things like that. But I want to go back and reread them. I will say that there is a tough audiobook, and that's great. I just blanked on it, and that's sad that I just bring. Oh, Christopher Alexander's books. This one is like the
pattern thinking,
the pattern language, and I've got both pattern language and the timeless way of building on audio, and they are kind of they're sort of a hard read or a hard listen.
I said pattern thinking, but I'm looking over here and actually found pattern thinking on my bookshelf because you were referring to pattern language, right? But
right, yeah.
Buckminster Fuller, another hard read.
Yeah.
Like his books are
about as technical as the work he does.
Right.
Yeah. There is one that I'm probably never going to read, and that's anything about Johnson, because I have a moral dilemma with him.
Yeah.
He they're like, ooh, the Glass House. The Glass House is a copy of the Farnsworth. But,
maybe you don't know enough, Cormac. Maybe I should
read about it. but one was done by somebody fleeing Nazi Germany, and one was done by somebody who liked Nazi Germany.
Well, this was a good question that nobody asked. So
exactly,
I asked it,
and nobody wanted to know the answer.
But we do have a couple of questions in the queue, and we will be addressing those on upcoming episodes. So listeners who've sent in questions know that we have received them, and we will be tackling those in upcoming episodes. Yeah. But remember the website, askarchispeak.com. All it is a place for you to ask questions. It's nothing else. If you want the podcast, go to archispeakpodcast.com. You can check out all the episodes, all the show notes for all those episodes over there. But a whole new website, askarchispeak.com, and you can give us something to talk about here on the show.
Yeah. And I will say that, yes, I have the audiobooks, but I do have books. And this is something that you and I are going to talk about. The 250 things that architects should know.
All right.
That'll be a future episode.
Homework.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you it's an interesting book too, because it's prompts. It is not an actual like you should know this, and this is why you should know it. It's literally prompts.
And if you don't know it, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, and if you don't know it, then
you're in trouble.
Then that's one of the 250 things that you should know. Like number 47. I'm going to give you. I will leave you with this.
Straight to number 47. Here we go.
Straight to number 47. What the brick really wants.
Oh, a little Louis Kahn reference. Nice.
Exactly.
Excellent. All right. So, that'll be fun.
We'll talk about that a little bit more.
All right. Sounds good. Go Lions.
Go Lions.